In the land of Skyrim, there lives the Nords, a race of warrior-like, battle-axe-wielding humans who enjoy a good bottle of mead and yearn for a good death. But, like most other races, the Nords are a very religious people, devoted to their gods and their teachings. However, the real Nordic Pantheon is often misunderstood, as when we see the Nords in Skyrim, they mostly worship the 9 divines of the Imperial Pantheon, especially Talos, and not the actual Nordic gods like Kyne, Jhunal, and even Alduin. So, why not take a closer look at the Nords and their gods? Hello, my fellow hirelings of House Telvanni. I'm Neloth, and today I had the privilege of talking to a Nord named Njord, who likely had very interesting parents to name him that. He is one of the few Nords that still worships the old gods, and was more than happy to discuss his pantheon with me so that it can be recorded and added to the great libraries of Port Telvannis. Knowledge is knowledge after all, and the Telvanni always yearn for more. So first, we need to talk about how the gods in the Nordic Pantheon are divided into 4 different groups, or houses. The dead gods, which include Shor and Tsun, fought and died to bring about the current world and now reside in Sovngarde, or at least Tsun does. The Hearth gods, who are Kyne, Mauloch, Dibella, Stuhn, and Jhunal, watch over the world, which is referred to as the current cycle, or Kalpa. The Twilight god is Alduin, who is referred to in the Imperial Pantheon as Akatosh. You might know him formerly from the game Skyrim as Alduin the World Eater, and serves as the main antagonist of the base game. And lastly are the testing gods, who are Orkey, Mauloch, and old Herma-Mora. These gods are the meddlesome ones that serve as antagonists to the Hearth gods and the Nordic people. Before talking about the individual gods, their relation to the Nords, and their differences with the Imperial Pantheon, I believe we should first discuss what Njord told me about the Nord beliefs and philosophies when it comes to their idea of creation. See, the Nords don't have an actual definitive belief on their own creation, as they hate thinking about it because many Nords see it as a waste of time. Instead, many Nords simply choose the oldest story that they know to be their allegory for creation, and Njord has kindly given me 2 stories on their creation that can both be seen as true. The first story is that the goddess Kyne, or Kinnereth, breathed life into the Nords at the throat of the world, which is the tallest mountain in Skyrim, and then they all eventually moved north to Herma-Mora, only to return to Skyrim centuries later. The second story is that the Nords were originally descendants of the Elnefey, who are the original inhabitants of Nirn. Many of the Elnefey on Tamriel turned into the elves we are used to seeing, like the Altmer and the Bosmer. However, there were other wandering Elnefey that were wandering outside of Tamriel. These Elnefey became men, which included the Nords of Herma-Mora, although at this moment in time they were simply just known as the Atmorans. While different, these 2 stories don't exactly conflict with each other, as in both stories, they started in Skyrim, flourished in Herma-Mora, and then returned to Skyrim to do some light genocide against the Falmer. I mean, retake their homeland for the glory of Shor. Yeah. Now, I think it's time for us to discuss the individual gods themselves, and analyze their spheres of influence, actions, and maybe any potential artifacts we could find if Njord wishes to tell us. Let us begin with the dead gods Shor and Tsun, who fought and died to bring about mankind and the current world, and now reside in the Nordic afterlife of Sovngarde. First is Shor, the Nordic interpretation of the missing god Lorcan. It should be noted that Shor and Lorcan are widely regarded as the same entity, with their differences being only in name. Shor is the god of the underworld and was the original chief deity of the Nordic Pantheon until he went the way of Kodlak Whitemane and was then replaced by Kyne. Shor is the husband of Kyne and the creator and ruler of Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife. It is said that Shor can be found in Sovngarde, swinging mead, feasting on oxes, and sparring with the Nord dead. However, he can only be seen by the dead. If one of the living somehow got to Sovngarde, they would not be able to lay eyes upon him. Shor is seen as the enemy of elves and the trickster god, as he either convinced or tricked the Etada, the original spirits who would become both the Aedra and Daedra, to give up much of their power to create the planet of Nirn. Trickery or not, the elven gods conspired to bring about Shor's defeat, and after Shor led the ancient Nords to victory time and time again over the elves, he was eventually defeated by elven giants. And these elven giants ripped out Shor's heart and paraded his heart like a flag in order to strike fear into the hearts of the Nords. Well, at least until an individual you might know named Ysmir quote-unquote shouted some sense into his Nordic brethren to fight back. The elven giants knew that they were going to be defeated by the Nords eventually, so in an effort to make sure the Nords could never get their beloved Shor back, they hid his heart where no one could find it. According to Njord, this isn't the last time Shor physically set foot on Tamriel. In fact, there are multiple stories where Shor's ghost was summoned onto Tamriel, and another story that suggests he was briefly reanimated during the Battle of Red Mountain. I will talk more about Shor's first summoning when we talk about the god Orkey. However, let me regale you with the story of Shor's involvement in the Battle of Red Mountain. Dagoth told the Nords that the heart of Shor had been rediscovered and was in the middle of Red Mountain, where both the Kyne and Dwemer resided. The Nordic tongues readied themselves for battle and also sung Shor's ghost into the world again, where he proceeded to gather an army like he did before. Now, the story of the Battle of Red Mountain is a very, very long one, so I won't go into most of it for the sake of time, but towards the end of the battle, the ghost of Shor briefly got his heart back, but in order to fully restore himself, he needed time. Time he did not have, as the Dwemer king Dumak wounded Shor using the tools of Kagrenak. Dumak was killed by Dagoth who was then killed by the Kyne war leader named Indoril Nerevar. Shor was able to mortally wound Nerevar, however, Nerevar was able to use trickery to cut out Shor's heart for a second time, leading to Shor's death again. On a side note, this fight is probably the greatest Mexican standoff in the history of storytelling. So many big, powerful names dropping like flies in a battle that decided the fate of all Tamriel. In the ancient Nordic Pantheon, Shor is depicted as a fox on the ancient Atmoran animal totems, likely because foxes are crafty and tricky, very similar to Shor himself. The other dead god aside from Shor is Tsun, who is the Nordic god of trials against adversity and is also the brother of the hearth god Stuhn and shield thane of Shor. Tsun was killed defending Shor from the elven gods, although how he was killed still remains much of a mystery. Tsun is tasked by Shor to guard the Whalebone Bridge in Sovngarde and serves as the Master of Trials, allowing new arrivals to enter Shor's Hall by proving their strength in combat against him. Tsun is seen mostly as a warrior, but he also has a great reverence for the clever craft, likely because Shor himself was no stranger to the clever craft, using such magics to create Sovngarde itself. He does, however, not respect thieves and assassins, believing that Shor does not know them and that they are not true and honorable warriors. Tsun also has the ability to return any wayward living soul back to Tamriel if they somehow make it to Sovngarde in the first place. He can also teach a shout to mortals that can summon a hero of Sovngarde to temporarily fight at their side. In the ancient Nordic Pantheon, Tsun is depicted as a bear among the ancient Atmoran totems. Next, we shall talk about the Hearth Gods, those that watch over and protect the current cycle, or Kalpa. The chief deity of the Hearth Gods is Kyne, unlike in the Imperial Pantheon, where Akatosh is seen as the chief deity, but we will get more into the dichotomy of Alduin and Akatosh later. First of the Hearth Gods is Kyne, also known as Kinnereth in the Imperial Pantheon. She is depicted as a hawk in the really old Nordic Pantheon, and is the goddess of the storm and the widow to the dead god Shor. She is known to be the blessed warrior wife and is the favored god amongst warriors instead of that pretender Talos, but that is Njord's words, not mine. As Kyne is known as the goddess of storm, she is closely associated with, you guessed it, rain and wind. However, she controls both forces of the storm, both to heal and to hurt. She has brought rain and snow to the Nords in dry times, but was also attributed with the death of Ysgrimor's son, Ingol, who was lost at sea in a storm. One of Kyne's most famous acts was teaching the Nords how to use the Thum, or shout, the way that dragons do in order to rebel against Alduin and his vicious dragon cult. According to Njord, the Nords were taught the Thum through Kyne's quote-unquote daughters. However, we know from the game of Skyrim that they were actually taught the Thum through Paarthurnax. However, both stories can be true. Kyne could view many of the dragons, including Paarthurnax, as her daughters. Dragons do not have definitive genders unlike mortal races, so it could work. Anyways, many great Thum wielders, or tongues as the Nords call them, are said to have been blessed by Kyne herself, including Wulfharth and Moriaus. Speaking of Moriaus, Kyne is also directly involved in the Elysian rebellion against the Aliens, creating the Boots of the Crusader that Pelennor Whitestrake wore, and giving birth to Moriaus himself, meaning he is a demigod and all Minotaurs have a direct lineage to the Nordic goddess herself. Kyne also goes by a few other names in the Nordic Pantheon. She is called the Mother of Men and Beasts because of one creation myth I mentioned of breathing life into the Nords at the throat of the world, and also giving birth to Moriaus and generally being respectful of animals in general. She is called Kiss at the End, as the Nords believe that Kyne leads the dead to Sovngarde, the realm of her dead husband Shor. And she is called Sister Hawk by the ancient Nords back when she was depicted as a hawk in animal totems. Next, let us turn lovingly to Mara, who is referred to by the Nords as the handmaiden of Kyne. Mara is the goddess of love, fertility, agriculture, and compassion, and is intertwined with the marriage customs of the Nords, who wear an amulet of Mara around their neck when seeking a spouse. In the ancient Nordic Pantheon, Mara is depicted as a wolf among the animal totems, and was referred to as the Mother Wolf. The ice wolves in Skyrim, especially those along the White River, are seen as being closely associated with Mara. In Skyrim, worship of Mara is the strongest in the city of Riften, due to her having a temple there where many Nords go to get married. During the events of Skyrim, while the Nordic Pantheon has declined, it seems that the Temple of Mara still clings to its Nordic Pantheon, as the temple leader Maramal refers to Kinnereth as Kyne, ironic seeing as how Maramal is a Redguard and not a Nord. However, there doesn't really seem to be much of a difference with Mara in the Nordic Pantheon compared to other pantheons, as Mara is seen as one of the more universal gods in all of Tamriel. Dibella is another goddess worshipped by the Nords, who is also quite universal in her worship. Dibella is the goddess of beauty and is referred to as the bedwife of Shor. She is also heavily worshipped in the City of Solitude and also the City of Markarth, where her temple resides, and is led by a Sibyl of Dibella who directly communes with her. However, the Temple of Dibella in Markarth seems to be less Nordic and more a combination of Imperial and Reachman practices. In the ancient Nordic Pantheon, Dibella is depicted as a silver moth, which is intriguing as moths are very closely connected to the Elder Scrolls, hence why those who read the Elder Scrolls are often referred to as moth priests. We may never know if there is a connection, and Njord sees such speculation as blasphemy, so to avoid getting a battle axe swung in my face, we shall move on. Now, the previous two Hearth gods were quite imperialized, so it was hard to talk about them in a Nordic setting. However, you will be pleased to know that the two next Hearth gods are much more Nordic in their interpretations. Stuhn, the Nordic precursor to Stendarr, who is the god of ransom, fraternity, and justice. He is the brother of Tsun, one of the dead gods, and is the shield thane of Shor, another dead god. How morbid. Stuhn is a warrior god that fought against the Aldmeri Pantheon and taught man the importance of how to take prisoners of war, which is being true to his name of being a ransom god. Many of his teachings are also closely related to the other Nordic god, Jhunal, who we will speak on soon. Njord speaks on the similarities of their teachings by saying, "To be an excellent warrior, you must also have a strong mind and the knowledge to carry you through battle." Stuhn is also seen as a crafting god, with many specialized forges and crafting sites that are dotted across Skyrim. Many armaments that are forged in Hafengar are named after him, likely as a sign of respect. Now, Zenithar is nowhere to be found in the Nordic Pantheon, and since he is seen as the crafting god in the Imperial Pantheon, it could be surmised that Stuhn is not just a Nordic interpretation of Stendarr, but also a combination of Stendarr and Zenithar. In the ancient Nordic pantheon, Stuhn is depicted as a whale and appears to be associated with snow whales that are sometimes seen in the skies of Skyrim. Something interesting to note is that the bridge in Sovngarde that leads into the halls of Shor is the skeleton of a whale, the bridge being called the Whalebone Bridge. Considering Stuhn is not a dead god, I don't believe that the Whalebone Bridge is the literal carcass of Stuhn, but rather I believe the bridge to be symbolic. On a side note, I find it very interesting how Stuhn's brother Tsun guards the Whalebone Bridge, which is likely symbolic to his brother. Similar to Kyne leading souls to Sovngarde, Stuhn might also do the same, bridging the gap between Shor's Hall and the rest of Sovngarde. Fishermen also have great reverence to Stuhn and often perform a ritual called the Rite of the Whale in hopes of catching a plentiful amount of fish. Last of the hearth gods is Jhunal, the rune god, also known as Julianos in the Imperial Pantheon. He is the god of hermetic orders, knowledge, and wisdom. Also probably god of magic runes as well, given he's called, well, the rune god. Worship of Jhunal is not extremely popular among Nords, as there are some that see magic and knowledge to be beneath them. However, there are Nords that aim for a higher purpose than swinging axes and bashing faces, and pursue scholarly goals like history, reading, and writing. It is widely believed by Nords that Jhunal is only a god for scholars and wizards, but there are more warrior-like Nords that do still respect Jhunal, because as Njord said when talking about Stuhn, "To be an excellent warrior, you must also have the strong mind and the knowledge to carry you through battle, etc., etc." Although I'm starting to think that Njord is just plagiarizing the book Jhunal the Rune God that describes Jhunal, but I won't insult his intelligence by asking. The dead god Tsun also refers to Jhunal as a clever man, which is a term Nords use to refer to Nordic mages and practitioners of hedge magic. In the ancient Nordic Pantheon, Jhunal is depicted as an owl. There is also an owl that is associated and devoted to Jhunal named Wisewing the Owl. Wisewing takes the form specifically of a barred owl and warns the unwary away from witch covens and graveyards during the holiday known as the Witches' Festival, which is the Elder Scrolls equivalent to Halloween. So, we have now discussed the dead gods and the hearth gods. This leaves us now with the twilight god Alduin and the testing gods. So, let us focus our attention onto the twilight god himself. Alduin is the Nordic equivalent of Akatosh. However, Alduin does not possess any of the similarities that Akatosh has. Alduin is known as the World Eater and the Harbinger of the End Times. Similar to how the dead gods brought about the current world and the hearth gods protect it, Alduin exists to bring about its end and usher in a new Kalpa. To the Nords, he is seen as a devil, similar to how one would view Molag Bal, but even still, Nords like Njord still revere and pray to him, but only to stave off his return and hope it will be another 1,000 generations before he is released upon the current cycle of the world. Now, that is what Alduin is supposed to do. However, much evidence and the events of Skyrim lead us to believe that Alduin rejected his duty or prophecy to destroy the world. Instead, he decided to rule the world and brought about a brutal and terrible regime where the dragons ruled all of Tamriel, with Alduin being the ultimate ruler. Now, I won't be talking at length about the dragon cult, as that can be saved for a separate video, but it did become the standard pantheon for many Nords, at least until Alduin was banished by a Nord hero named Feldir the Old, with help from his companions Gormlaith Golden Hilt and Hakon One Eye. Now, while many Nords did see Alduin as being the same being as Akatosh, the lines started to blur, and eventually by the late 2nd and 3rd era, many Nords started to believe that Alduin and Akatosh were actually separate beings and not the same. However, there are still some, like Njord, that disagree. Now that we have spoken of the gods from all sides of the Kalpa, it is time to talk about the testing gods, those who the Nords are vigilant of and guard against in order to protect the hearth. Now, I want to start with Orkey, as it's ultimately unclear whether he is a hearth god or a testing god, but judging by his actions that I'll get into, it seems to me that Orkey is more of a testing kind of god who is seen as an enemy of the Nords. So, Orkey is the Nordic god that is a combination of Orkey in the Imperial Pantheon and Mauloch, the Daedric prince who is worshipped by the Orcs. Orkey is also known as Old Knocker, the Death God, and also a Lone God. According to Njord, Nords once believed that they had the same lifespans of elves, which was most likely true given how I talked about how Nords are likely descendants of the El-Nefey. Anyways, Orkey had always been a plague upon the Nords and was constantly gnawing at their lifespan and stealing their years away. In the First Era, during the reign of High King Wulfharth, Orkey summoned Alduin, and nearly every Nord was apparently eaten down to 6 years old, meaning almost every Nord had been turned into a literal goddamn child. Wulfharth pleaded for Shor for help, and Shor's ghost responded and fought Alduin on the spirit realm, which he had also done at the beginning of time as well. Shor won this fight and threw the same life-spanning curse that Orkey had given to the Nords back on Orkey's own people, the Orcs. That is why the Orcs have the same lifespan as men do and do not live as long as the High Elves or Wood Elves, at least according to Njord. Now, Orkey likes to test all mortals and also loves starting quarrels, likely because he has an obsession with death. But even after all that Orkey has done, he still has many priests and temples called the Halls of Dead that are seen in Skyrim, where many of Skyrim's dead are placed in. The priests of Orkey are basically the exact same as the priests of Orkey as we see them in Skyrim, looking after the dead and making sure they are consecrated and cared for. This has led many Nords to become quite confused as to whether Orkey is a testing god or actually a hearth god, and even Njord doesn't really know. However, because of his actions with ruining the lifespans of the Nords, at least in mythology, I would personally classify him as a testing god. In the ancient Nordic Pantheon, Orkey is depicted as a snake among the animal totems. The next testing god is Mauloch, who, unlike Orkey, is definitively seen as the Daedric prince Mauloch, the Orcish god. Mauloch is known amongst the Nords as the god of orcs, and also, I can't believe this is a title in lore, but he is also known as Mountain Fart. If Njord is trying to pull a prank on me, I will turn his eyes into tentacles. Anyways, Mountain Fart over here frequently engaged in hostilities with the Nords of Skyrim and constantly troubled the heirs of the King Harald. However, Mauloch was defeated at the Battle of Dragon Wall by unknown means and fled east. According to Njord, whose information I'm starting to doubt, Mauloch became so angry after he fled the battle that the sky was filled with his sulfurous hatred, later called the Year of Winter in Summer. Between Orkey and Mauloch, it seems that the Orcs are the ancient enemy of the Nords, similar to how the Nords are the ancient enemy of the Dunmer. Sadly, Mauloch has no known animal totems in the ancient Nordic Pantheon. However, he could still have a relation to the snake totem, like Orkey, considering Mauloch and Orkey do share some relation to the Daedric prince, Malakath. The last testing god is Herma-Mora, who is the Nordic interpretation of the Daedric prince Herma-Mora. Herma-Mora is also known as the Woodland Man, and almost all stories that involve Herma-Mora also involve the Nordic hero Ysmir escaping from his devious schemes. One tale involving the two starts with Ysmir hunting in the Atmoran Frostwood, where he saw a white stag. He attempted to shoot the stag but missed, and then vowed to pursue the white stag until he felled it. Ysmir had begun to lose the white stag's trail in a snowy white mist, and when he fully lost the trail, a hare appeared and told Ysmir where the stag had gone. Ysmir asked the hare how it knew where the white stag was, and the hare responded by saying he could hear the stag with his long ears, and also said that if Ysmir had long ears, he could also hear his prey. Ysmir then started to wish that his ears were as long as the hare's, and as the hare twitched his nose, Ysgrimir's ears proceeded to become long and pointed. Suddenly, a fox leapt out and slaughtered the hare. The fox revealed itself to be Shor himself, and said that the hare was Herma-Mora. Shor proceeded to scold Ysgrimir for almost being turned into an elf, and then told Ysgrimir where the stag was really located. Before leaving, Shor did give one final warning, saying, "Eschew the tricks of the elves, lest ye become one." Like Mauloch, no animal totem exists in the ancient Nordic Pantheon that properly depicts Herma-Mora. However, based on the story with Ysgrimir, one could inference that Herma-Mora is depicted as a hare or rabbit in animal totems. However, we just simply haven't seen any of them yet. And that is all of the gods as seen in the Nordic Pantheon. The dead gods, the hearth gods, the twilight god, and the testing gods. However, there is one individual or title that exists in the Nordic Pantheon that I would love to talk about, and that is Ysmir. Ysmir is not a person necessarily, but rather a title. Ysmir translates to Dragon of the North, and has been used quite a bit by a few Nordic heroes, including Pelinal Whitestrake, the Star-Made Knight who fought against the Aelids, Tiber Septim, who eventually became the god Talos, Wulfharth, one of the most notorious Nordic kings, and the last Dragonborn, the player character in the game of Skyrim. Now, this is getting more into the theory side of things, but the Nords mostly see Ysmir as the Nordic interpretation of Talos, similar to Kyne being Kinnereth, Stuhn being Stendarr, and so forth. Because Ysmir is closely associated with Talos and also Pelinal and the last Dragonborn, I believe that the title of Ysmir is much more deeper than just a simple title. There is another title which is called the Shezarene, which is basically the avatar of Lorcan, or at least in the Nordic case, Shor, and according to official and unofficial lore written by Michael Kirkbride, Pelinal Whitestrake, Wulfharth, and Tiber Septim are all seen as the Shezarene. So, is it too far of a stretch to say that the titles Shezarene and Ysmir are one and the same? That they are all avatars of Lorcan, or rather in this case Shor, which includes the last Dragonborn? Shor fought Alduin in the beginning of time, and in the middle of time kinda when Orkey summoned him. Perhaps Shor returned once again to fight Alduin at the end of time, taking the appearance of the last Dragonborn. But what do I know? I'm just a sociopathic elf wizard that sits in his tower all day performing weird experiments and listening to savage, I mean illustrious Nords with a strong reverence for faith and culture. Thank you very much, Njord, for all of your information on your people's faith. Perhaps I will call on you again, but I hope you have enough might to always be right. And that is all I wrote, a video where I go in depth on the Nordic Pantheon and the various gods that exist within it. This video ended up becoming much longer than I anticipated, but I still enjoyed it nonetheless. If this video does well, I would absolutely love to do more videos discussing the various other pantheons like the Aldmeri and Yokuden ones as well. So with all that being said, make sure to like the like button, like the subscribe button, and like the bell notification down below to be updated on future videos. And I will see you whenever the fuck I decide to upload again. House Telvanni be with you.
Please, O hero of Skyrim, I shall be ever so grateful.